In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where ancient empires trade in star-forged metals and quantum encrypted data, there exists a universal truth: dragons are extinct. These magnificent creatures, once the apex predators of a dozen worlds, were hunted to extinction by the Corvani Empire 3 millennia ago. Their bones fetch fortunes, their scales power the most advanced starships, and their hearts, well, their hearts are the stuff of legend. So when Jake Morrison, a broke human mechanic working in the grimy underbelly of Nexus Station, spots what looks suspiciously like a dragon egg sitting forgotten in a junk dealer's clearance bin marked 3 credits, decorative stone, he thinks he's either hallucinating from too much recycled air, or he's about to become the luckiest scavenger in 3 sectors. But Jake doesn't know that this particular decorative stone is about to rewrite the laws of physics, challenge an empire that spans 1,000 star systems, and prove once again why humans have a reputation for turning the impossible into the inevitable. Because when that dragon finally roars, the entire galaxy will remember why some species refuse to stay extinct. What follows is the story of how 3 credits, 1 stubborn human, and a supposedly mythical creature brought the most powerful empire in known space to its knees. Jake Morrison wiped the grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better decades and squinted at the fusion coil sparking dangerously in front of him. The Nexus Station repair bay smelled like burnt ozone and broken dreams, much like everything else in the Outer Rim territories. 3 years he'd been stuck on this floating scrapyard, fixing ships for traders who paid in promises and pirates who paid in threats. His stomach growled, reminding him that nutritional paste cost credits he didn't have. Again. The Corvani credit chip in his pocket held exactly 2.75 credits, barely enough for a day's worth of the bland protein substitute that passed for food in the station's lower levels. The comm unit crackled to life above his workstation. "Morrison, you got another customer." Bay 7. Jake groaned and set down his plasma welder. Bay 7 was where they stuck the desperate cases, the ships too damaged or too old for the premium repair docks. He grabbed his toolkit and trudged through the maze of corridors that connected the repair bays, dodging service droids and trying not to breathe too deeply of the recycled air that always tasted faintly of metal shavings. The ship waiting in Bay 7 made him whistle low. It was a Terran freight hauler, probably 50 years old and held together with prayer and salvaged parts. Burn marks scarred its hull like battle wounds, and one of the engines hung at an angle that defied several laws of physics. "You the mechanic?" The voice belonged to a woman in her 60s, weather-beaten and tough as stellar radiation. Captain's bars gleamed on her collar, tarnished but proud. "Jake Morrison. What happened to your ship?" "Pirates happened. 3-ship Wolfpack caught us coming out of hyperspace near the Kethera system. We made it out, but barely." She gestured at the damaged engine. "Can you fix it?" Jake circled the ship, running diagnostic scans with his handheld unit. The readings made him wince. Structural integrity at 40%, fusion reactor running on backup containment, and the hyperspace motivator looked like someone had hit it with an asteroid. "It's going to cost more than the ship's worth," he said finally. The captain's face fell. "How much?" 800 credits. Minimum." She closed her eyes and leaned against the bulkhead. "I've got 300. It's everything I have left." Jake had heard variations of this story 1,000 times. Independent traders trying to make an honest living in a galaxy that favored the big shipping corporations. Pirates, system failures, and equipment breakdown slowly bleeding them dry until they had to sell their ships for scrap and find passage home on corporate vessels. "I'm sorry. I can't do it for 300. The parts alone will cost more than that." The captain nodded slowly, accepting defeat with the grace of someone who'd faced it before. "I understand. Thanks for looking." She was halfway to the exit when Jake called after her. "Wait. What's your cargo?" "Junk, mostly. Picked up a load of salvage from a failed mining operation. Nothing valuable enough to cover repairs. Mind if I take a look? Sometimes there's useful parts in salvage loads." She shrugged and keyed open the cargo bay. Jake stepped inside and immediately understood why she'd called it junk. Broken mining equipment, twisted metal fragments, and boxes of components too damaged to be worth much. But, in the back corner, almost hidden behind a bent support strut, something caught his eye. A small crate sat alone, its contents spilling out through a crack in the side. Most of it was the usual detritus, broken tools, burnt-out circuit boards, corroded metal samples. But, nestled among the debris was something that made Jake's breath catch. An egg. Or at least, something egg-shaped. About the size of his head, dark red with veins of silver running through it like lightning frozen in stone. It felt warm to the touch, and, when he picked it up, he could swear he felt something shift inside. "What's this?" he asked, holding it up. The captain glanced over and shrugged. "Decorative stone, I think. Mining crews sometimes collect interesting rocks. Probably volcanic glass or something." Jake turned the object over in his hands. Volcanic glass didn't feel warm. Volcanic glass didn't have the subtle, almost organic texture he could feel under his fingers. And volcanic glass definitely didn't make his universal translator buzz with warnings about unidentified biological signatures. But the captain didn't need to know any of that. "I'll tell you what," Jake said, trying to keep his voice casual. "I'll take this off your hands and give you a discount on the repairs. Call it 600 credits total." The captain's eyes narrowed. "That thing's worth 300 credits to you? Sentimental value. Reminds me of something from Earth." It was a weak lie, but the captain was desperate enough to take it. Deal. 3 hours later, Jake had transferred the stone to his small quarters in the station's residential section and started working on the captain's ship. The repairs would take 2 days, during which time he'd be living on emergency rations and hoping his mysterious acquisition was worth more than the meal credits he'd given up for it. His quarters were barely large enough for a bed, a small desk, and a storage locker. Standard accommodation for lower-level station workers, about as comfortable as a prison cell but with slightly better ventilation. Jake set the stone on his desk and activated his personal scanner, a military surplus unit he'd bought off a retiring fleet engineer. The readings were impossible. According to the scanner, the object was composed of materials that didn't exist on any periodic table. The stone registered as both organic and inorganic simultaneously, with energy patterns that suggested active biological processes despite showing no signs of life. Temperature remained constant at exactly 37 degrees Celsius, regardless of ambient conditions. Jake ran the scan 3 more times, recalibrated his equipment, and ran it again. The results didn't change. Whatever this thing was, it definitely wasn't a decorative rock. He activated his computer terminal and started searching the galactic databases for anything similar. Most of the files were restricted or required academic credentials he didn't have, but he found enough fragments to piece together a disturbing picture. Dragon eggs. According to the scattered references he could access, dragon eggs had been objects of legend and scientific curiosity for millennia. The few specimens ever discovered had sold for millions of credits to private collectors and research institutions. But that had been before the Corvani Empire's systematic extermination campaign 3,000 years ago. Dragons, the files claimed, had been more than just large predators. They were intelligent, possibly more intelligent than most spacefaring species. They could manipulate energy at a quantum level, fly through space without mechanical assistance, and allegedly communicate across vast distances through means that human science couldn't explain. They had also been the only species to successfully resist Corvani expansion. That resistance had ended with their extinction. The Corvani Empire had developed weapons specifically designed to hunt dragons, tracking them across star systems and eliminating them with ruthless efficiency. The last confirmed dragon sighting had been over 2,000 years ago. So what Jake held in his hands was either an elaborate fake, a genuine fossil worth more than most starships, or something that could get him killed if the wrong people found out about it. He was still pondering this when the stone started glowing. Soft red light pulsed beneath its surface, following the silver veins like circuitry activating. The warmth increased noticeably, and Jake could swear he heard something from inside. Not quite a heartbeat, but a rhythm that reminded him of deep breathing. Jake grabbed his scanner and took another reading. The energy patterns had changed, becoming more complex and organized. Whatever was inside was definitely alive, and it was waking up. Over the next day, the changes accelerated. The stone grew warmer and brighter, and hairline cracks began appearing along its surface. Jake found himself talking to it during his breaks from repairing the captain's ship, feeling slightly ridiculous but unable to shake the sense that something was listening. "I don't know what you are," he said during one of these one-sided conversations, "but I hope you're friendly. Because if you're not, I'm probably about to become the galaxy's unluckiest mechanic." The stone pulsed once, almost like a response. Jake finished the captain's repairs ahead of schedule, partly because he wanted to focus on his mysterious discovery, and partly because her gratitude made him feel slightly less guilty about essentially stealing what might be the most valuable object in known space. She paid him the agreed-upon 600 credits and departed with effusive thanks, completely unaware that she just traded away something that could reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. That evening, as Jake sat in his quarters studying the now-glowing stone, his comm unit chimed with an incoming message. The sender's ID made his blood run cold. Corvani Imperial Enforcement Division. Station Commander Vextar requesting immediate meeting regarding suspicious biological signatures detected in residential section. Jake stared at the message for a long moment, his mind racing. Somehow, the Corvani knew. Their sensors had picked up the energy signatures from the egg, or someone had reported the unusual readings, or they had agents monitoring salvage transactions. But Corvani didn't request meetings. They issued orders and expected immediate compliance. Their enforcement divisions were feared throughout the galaxy for their efficiency and brutality. If they suspected he possessed something illegal, especially something connected to dragons, he would disappear into their interrogation facilities and never be seen again. Jake looked at the glowing stone, now visibly cracking along its surface. Whatever was inside was close to hatching, and he was out of time. He had three choices: surrender the egg to the Corvani and hope they believed he didn't know what it was, try to flee the station and almost certainly be caught, or find a way to protect something that might be the last of its kind. The stone pulsed again, brighter this time, and Jake made his decision. He grabbed his emergency kit and started stuffing it with portable tools, energy cells, and emergency rations. The station's industrial sections had dozens of abandoned areas where someone could hide, at least temporarily. If he could keep the egg safe until it hatched, maybe the creature inside could protect itself. As he prepared to leave, Jake caught sight of his reflection in the small mirror beside his bed. 3 days ago, he'd been a broke mechanic with no prospects and no hope of ever leaving this backwater station. Now he was about to become a fugitive from the most powerful empire in the galaxy, protecting something that shouldn't exist. He picked up the glowing stone, surprised by how much heavier it felt now, and headed for the door. Behind him, his comm unit chimed again with another message from the Corvani. Jake didn't stop to read it. The corridors were relatively empty at this hour, most of the station's population either asleep or working the night shifts in the docking bays. Jake made his way toward the industrial sectors, staying in the shadows and avoiding the main thoroughfares where security cameras clustered like electronic eyes. The stone's glow was becoming difficult to hide, pulsing like a heartbeat made of light. Jake wrapped it in his jacket, but the red illumination still leaked through the fabric. Every shadow seemed to hide Corvani agents, every footstep echoed like approaching doom. He was 3 levels down from his quarters when he heard the announcement echoing through the station's public address system. Attention all residents and visitors. The station is now under Imperial security lockdown. All individuals must report to designated assembly areas for verification. Failure to comply will result in immediate detention. Jake pressed himself against the wall of an alcove and closed his eyes. They weren't taking any chances. A full lockdown meant they knew exactly what they were looking for, and they were prepared to search every centimeter of the station to find it. The stone grew noticeably warmer in his arms, and he heard something new from within it. A sound like singing, almost too low to hear but felt as much as heard. Musical notes that seemed to resonate in his bones and make his teeth ache. "Easy there," he whispered. "Just hold on a little longer." The singing stopped abruptly, replaced by a different sound. Tapping. Something inside the egg was tapping against the shell with rhythmic precision. Jake looked around the alcove where he was hiding and realized it was more than just a shadowed corner. It was the entrance to one of the old maintenance tunnels that ran through the station's superstructure. The access panel was corroded but functional, and his mechanics code still worked to unlock it. The tunnel beyond was narrow and dark, barely tall enough for him to walk upright. Emergency lighting strips provided dim illumination every few meters, casting everything in sickly yellow light. Jake had worked in these tunnels before, during his early days on the station, and he knew they connected to the abandoned sections in the industrial decks. Behind him, he could hear the sound of boots on metal decking and the electronic whine of scanning equipment. The Corvani were conducting a systematic search, moving through the residential areas with military precision. The stone shell cracked audibly, a sound like breaking crystal. Light spilled through the fissure, brighter than before and tinged with gold instead of just red. The tapping from inside became more urgent, more insistent. "Not yet," Jake whispered desperately. "Just a little further." But the creature inside had its own schedule. Another crack appeared, then another. The shell began to split along the silver veins, revealing glimpses of something that made Jake's breath catch. Scales. Dark red scales that seemed to absorb light and reflected back as something entirely different. And, beneath them, the unmistakable curve of a wing. Jake broke into a run, caution abandoned in favor of speed. The tunnel stretched ahead of him, branching into a maze of maintenance conduits and serviceways. He took turns at random, guided only by the need to put distance between himself and the search teams. The stone shell fell away in his hands, crumbling like an ancient artifact exposed to air. What remained was unmistakably alive, unmistakably impossible, and unmistakably beautiful. The dragon was small, no larger than a house cat, but perfectly formed. Its scales shifted color as Jake watched, cycling through shades of red and gold and deep purple. Its eyes were large and intelligent, meeting Jake's gaze with an awareness that sent chills down his spine. Delicate wings flexed experimentally, and a long tail coiled around Jake's wrist like a living bracelet. The creature opened its mouth and made a sound like wind chimes made of starlight. Not a roar, not yet, but something that spoke of hidden power and ancient wisdom. "Hello there," Jake whispered, and the dragon tilted its head as if considering his words. From somewhere behind them came the sound of footsteps echoing in the tunnels. The search teams had found the maintenance access. Jake looked down at the newborn dragon cradled in his hands and realized that his life had just become infinitely more complicated. The dragon looked back at him with eyes that seemed far older than its newborn body, and Jake could swear it understood exactly what was happening. What they were both up against. What they would have to do to survive. Together, they disappeared deeper into the mechanical heart of Nexus Station, pursued by an empire that had thought it had won this war 3,000 years ago. The abandoned recycling facility in Section C7 had been sealed for 2 years after a chemical leak made it unsuitable for regular operations. The Corvani search teams had passed through it once during their initial sweep, deemed it unfit for human habitation, and moved on. Jake had been hiding there for 6 hours, watching his newborn companion explore its cramped environment with the curiosity of something discovering the universe for the first time. The dragon, which Jake had started thinking of as Echo due to the musical sounds it made, had grown noticeably larger since hatching. Not dramatically, but enough that Jake was beginning to wonder just how big it might eventually become. Its scales had settled into a deep crimson color with veins of silver that pulsed with their own light, and its intelligence was becoming more apparent with each passing hour. Echo seemed to understand that they were hiding. It kept its vocalizations to soft trills and whistles, and when footsteps echoed in the corridors outside, it would press close to Jake and remain perfectly still. More than once, Jake had the unsettling feeling that the dragon was protecting him as much as he was protecting it. His portable scanner had been monitoring Corvani communications since the lockdown began. The search teams were thorough but frustrated. They knew their target was somewhere on the station, but the biological signatures they were tracking kept appearing in impossible locations. One moment the readings would spike near the docking bays, the next they would register in the upper residential sections, then disappear entirely for hours at a time. Jake was beginning to suspect that Echo had something to do with the confused sensor readings. "You're messing with their equipment, aren't you?" he whispered to the dragon, which was currently perched on a broken conveyor belt, examining a discarded plasma coupling with what looked like scientific interest. Echo looked up at him and made a sound like distant thunder. Not aggressive, but definitely acknowledging. Jake's comm unit buzzed with an encrypted message. He almost ignored it, assuming it was another Corvani demand for compliance, but the sender's ID made him pause. It was from Marcus Chen, his former supervisor from the Fleet Engineering Corps. Jake, if you're receiving this, you're in deeper trouble than you know. The Corvani aren't just looking for contraband. They've mobilized a full Imperial response fleet. Whatever you found, they consider it a threat to galactic security. There's a ship waiting at Docking Bay 94. Captain's name is Sarah Reyes, tell her Marcus sent you. Trust no one else. Delete this message. Jake stared at the screen for a long moment, then deleted the message as instructed. Marcus Chen had been his commanding officer during the border wars, and one of the few people in the galaxy Jake trusted completely. If Marcus said there was a ship waiting, there was a ship waiting. But getting to Docking Bay 94 would mean crossing half the station while avoiding search teams, surveillance systems, and whatever other security measures the Corvani had deployed. With a dragon that glowed like an emergency beacon and was growing larger by the hour. What do you think? Jake asked Echo. Feel like taking a little trip? The dragon stretched its wings, which now spanned nearly half a meter from tip to tip, and made a sound that Jake interpreted as eager agreement. Then, it did something that made Jake's blood run cold. Echo opened its mouth and breathed fire. Not a large flame, barely enough to singe a piece of debris on the floor, but unmistakably dragon fire. The flame was pale blue and incredibly hot, hot enough that Jake could feel the heat from 3 meters away. The metal where it struck began to glow cherry red within seconds. Okay, Jake said faintly. Good to know. Echo looked pleased with itself and hopped down from the conveyor belt to investigate the still glowing metal. Jake realized that his small companion was not just intelligent and growing rapidly, but also developing abilities that could level city blocks if it wanted to. The scanner crackled with new transmissions. The Corvani were expanding their search to the industrial sections, and they were bringing heavy equipment. Plasma cutters to breach sealed doors, atmospheric processors to clear toxic areas, and bioscanners powerful enough to detect life signs through meters of solid metal. They were out of time. Jake gathered his emergency kit and scooped up Echo, who had apparently decided that the glowing metal was not edible and had lost interest. The dragon settled comfortably in the crook of his arm, its warm weight both comforting and terrifying. The route to Docking Bay 94 led through some of the busiest sections of the station. Jake would need to avoid the main corridors, stay away from security checkpoints, and somehow make it past whatever defenses the Corvani had established around the docking areas. He started with the maintenance tunnels, following a path he'd mapped out during his years working station repairs. The tunnels connected to service conduits that ran parallel to the main corridors, allowing maintenance crews to access critical systems without interfering with normal traffic. Echo seemed fascinated by the tunnel environment, its head turning to track sounds Jake couldn't hear and its eyes focusing on details he couldn't see. Several times it made soft warning sounds just before Jake would have walked into security sensors or automated systems that would have triggered alarms. You can see their electronics, Jake realized. That's how you're scrambling their sensors. Echo made a pleased trill and nuzzled against his arm. Jake was beginning to understand that dragons might be more than just large predators. They might be something closer to living computers, capable of interfacing with technology in ways that conventional science couldn't explain. The service conduits eventually led to the station's central hub, a massive chamber where dozens of corridors converged around the main transit system. Jake peered through a maintenance grate and immediately pulled back. The hub was crawling with Corvani enforcement troops, their black armor gleaming under the harsh overhead lighting. A portable command post had been established near the transit platform, bristling with scanning equipment and communication arrays. Jake counted at least 30 troops, plus automated sentries positioned at every exit. There was no way to cross the hub undetected. Echo nudged his shoulder and pointed toward a different section of the grate. When Jake looked where the dragon was indicating, he saw something he'd missed. A cargo transport system ran beneath the main floor, designed to move supplies and equipment between sections without interfering with passenger traffic. The tracks were automated and rarely monitored except during scheduled maintenance periods. It was dangerous, uncomfortable, and possibly insane. It was also their only option. Jake found an access panel to the cargo system 3 levels down, in a section of the hub that the Corvani hadn't bothered to fully secure. The transport cars were small, barely large enough for emergency supplies and definitely not designed for human passengers. But Jake had squeezed into worse spaces during his fleet engineering days. Echo seemed to approve of the plan, settling into the cramped car with an adaptability that suggested it would be comfortable anywhere. Jake programmed the car's destination manually, overriding the safety protocols that would normally prevent such modifications. The car lurched into motion with a grinding sound that made him wince, carrying them into the dark tunnels beneath the station. The journey took 20 minutes that felt like hours. The car rattled and shook as it followed the automated tracks, passing through sections of the station Jake had never seen before. Industrial processors, atmospheric recycling plants, and the massive fusion reactors that powered Nexus Station's operations. Echo spent the trip with its head pressed against the car's small window, watching the mechanical landscape rush past with obvious fascination. Jake found himself wondering what the Dragon saw when it looked at the station's technology. Did it see the same collection of circuits and processors that he did, or something entirely different? The car finally shuddered to a halt at a cargo distribution center near the docking bays. Jake forced open the emergency exit and helped Echo out of the cramped compartment. The Dragon had grown noticeably larger during the journey, now about the size of a medium dog butt, with proportionally larger wings and a more elongated neck. The docking bay section was quieter than the central hub, but Jake could see Corvani patrols moving between the berths. They were checking every ship, scanning cargo manifests and interrogating crews. Bay 94 was still 6 berths away, and the patrols were moving in a pattern that would bring them directly into Jake's path within minutes. Echo made a soft questioning sound and looked up at Jake with those unsettlingly intelligent eyes. The Dragon seemed to be asking for permission to do something. "What do you have in mind?" Jake whispered. Echo spread its wings and rose gracefully into the air. Jake reached out to stop it, but the Dragon was already moving, flying toward the nearest patrol with silent purpose. Jake watched in horror as his companion approached 4 heavily armed Corvani soldiers. Then, the soldiers' equipment began malfunctioning. Their scanners sparked and went dead. Their communication units filled with static. Their armor's targeting systems shut down completely. Within seconds, the entire patrol was effectively blind and deaf, standing in the middle of the corridor looking around in confusion. Echo circled back to Jake with what looked suspiciously like a smug expression. The Dragon had somehow disabled every piece of electronic equipment the soldiers carried without making a sound or leaving any trace of its presence. "Show off," Jake muttered, but he was grinning as he said it. The path to Bay 94 was clear now, the patrol busy trying to restart their equipment and calling for technical support. Jake and Echo made it to the berth without further incident, arriving at a ship that immediately made Jake feel better about their chances. The vessel was a modified Terran scout ship, sleek and fast with the kind of defensive systems that suggested its captain was used to operating in dangerous territory. The name Starfire was painted in faded letters on its hull, and Jake could see weapon ports that definitely hadn't been part of the original design specifications. A woman emerged from the ship's airlock as Jake approached. She was tall and athletic, with the kind of scars that came from real combat experience and the confident bearing of someone who'd survived more battles than she'd lost. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her hand rested casually on the grip of a military-grade plasma pistol. "You Jake Morrison?" she asked without preamble. "Depends who's asking." "Captain Sarah Reyes. Marcus Chen sends his regards and says you've got something that's making the Corvani very nervous." Her eyes fell on Echo, who was perched on Jake's shoulder like an exotic bird. "I'm guessing that's it." "That's it. How much did Marcus tell you?" "Enough to know we need to leave immediately and not enough to know where we're going." She gestured toward the ship. "Come on, my crew's already prepping for departure." Jake followed her up the boarding ramp, Echo still perched on his shoulder and taking everything in with obvious curiosity. The ship's interior was clean and well-maintained, with the kind of modifications that spoke of serious money and serious planning. This wasn't a smuggler's vessel or an independent trader's freighter. This was a ship designed for war. "Welcome aboard the Starfire," Captain Reyes said as the airlock sealed behind them. "We're going to get you away from the Corvani, but first I need to know what we're dealing with." "Marcus said you found something impossible." Before Jake could answer, Echo made a decision for him. The dragon launched itself from his shoulder and flew to the middle of the corridor, where it hovered in midair and began to sing. The sound was unlike anything Jake had heard before. Rich, complex harmonies that seemed to come from multiple sources at once, notes that resonated through the ship's hull and made the air itself vibrate with musical energy. The song was hauntingly beautiful and somehow familiar, as if Jake had heard it in dreams he'd forgotten. Captain Reyes stared at Echo with an expression of pure amazement. "Is that a dragon?" "That's a dragon," Jake confirmed. "Dragons are extinct." "Apparently not all of them." Echo finished its song and settled gracefully onto the deck, looking up at them with an expression that clearly said it was waiting for their response. Captain Reyes knelt down and extended her hand toward the dragon, moving slowly and carefully. Echo sniffed her fingers delicately, then rubbed its head against her palm with a contented purr. "Hello, beautiful," Captain Reyes whispered. "You're going to change everything, aren't you?" The ship's intercom crackled to life. "Captain, we've got company. 3 Corvani patrol ships just dropped out of hyperspace and they're requesting permission to board." Captain Reyes stood up, her expression hardening into something that reminded Jake of his old fleet commanders. "Not today, they're not. All hands, prepare for immediate departure. Emergency protocols authorized." She looked at Jake and Echo, who was now examining the ship's bulkheads with obvious interest. "Hold on to something. We're about to find out just how badly the Corvani want your friend back." The ship shuddered as its engines came online, and Jake felt the familiar sensation of artificial gravity adjusting for acceleration. Through the viewports, he could see the Corvani ships moving to intercept them, their sleek black hulls bristling with weapons. Echo spread its wings and made a sound that was definitely not a song. It was deeper, more primal, and it made Jake's bones ache with its intensity. The sound of something ancient and powerful and very, very angry. The lights on the Corvani ships began to flicker. "What's it doing?" Captain Reyes asked, staring at Echo in fascination. "I think," Jake said slowly, "it's getting ready to remind the galaxy why dragons used to rule the stars." Echo opened its mouth, took a deep breath, and roared. The roar that erupted from Echo's throat defied every law of physics Jake thought he understood. Sound wasn't supposed to propagate through vacuum, but somehow the dragon's challenge reached the Corvani ships across the empty space between them. Jake watched in amazement as their pursuit vessels shuddered and veered off course, their formation breaking apart like leaves in a hurricane. "Impossible," Captain Reyes breathed, staring at the tactical display. "Their ships just lost power across all systems. Engines, weapons, life support, everything." Echo settled back on its haunches, looking remarkably pleased with itself for a creature that had been born less than 24 hours ago. The dragon had grown again during their escape from the station, now roughly the size of a large dog with wings that could span 2 meters when fully extended. Its scales had deepened to a rich burgundy color, and the silver veins running through them pulsed with what looked like flowing energy. "That was just a baby roar," Jake said, reaching out to scratch behind Echo's head. The dragon leaned into his touch with a rumbling purr that vibrated through the ship's deck plating. "I hate to think what it'll sound like when it gets bigger." The Starfire's engines completed their startup sequence, and Jake felt the familiar lurch of a ship transitioning to superluminal speed. Through the viewports, the stars stretched into lines of light as they entered hyperspace, leaving the disabled Corvani vessels far behind. "Where are we going?" Jake asked. Captain Reyes consulted her navigation display. "Marcus gave me coordinates for a safe house in the Epsilon sector. Remote system, no major settlements, and definitely no Corvani presence. We should be able to lay low there while we figure out what to do next." "What's to figure out?" "We keep Echo safe and away from the Corvani." "It's not that simple." Captain Reyes called up a holographic display showing galactic territory maps. The Corvani Empire controls 60% of known space. They have the largest fleet, the most advanced technology, and the resources of 1,000 star systems. They didn't become the dominant power in the galaxy by giving up when things got difficult. She highlighted a series of star systems in red. They're already mobilizing response fleets. Within 48 hours, they'll have ships searching every system within 100 light-years of Nexus Station. They'll check every planet, every asteroid, every hiding place they can think of. Jake studied the map, understanding dawning. They're terrified. They should be. Dragons weren't just large predators. They were the only species that ever successfully resisted Corvani expansion. The Empire spent 3 centuries hunting them to extinction because they represented an existential threat to Corvani supremacy. Echo made a soft questioning sound and hopped onto the navigation console, studying the holographic display with obvious intelligence. The dragon's head tilted as it examined the red zones marking Corvani territory, and Jake could swear he saw calculation in those ancient-looking eyes. The question is, Captain Reyes continued, what do we do with the last dragon in the galaxy? Keep it hidden and hope the Corvani eventually give up, or what? Or accept that hiding is just postponing the inevitable. She gestured at the tactical data flowing across her screens. The Corvani won't stop looking. They can't afford to. As long as Echo exists, it represents the possibility that other dragons might still be alive somewhere. That maybe their victory 3,000 years ago wasn't as complete as they thought. Jake looked at Echo, who had somehow activated the navigation controls and was manipulating the star chart with delicate touches of its claws. The dragon seemed to be searching for something specific among the thousands of systems displayed. What are you looking for? Jake asked. Echo trilled softly and expanded a section of the chart showing the galactic rim, far beyond the boundaries of Corvani space. Systems so remote that many of them had never been surveyed, let alone colonized. The dragon touched one particular system with its claw, a nondescript collection of planets orbiting a red dwarf star. Draco's Rest, Captain Reyes read from the navigation database. I've never heard of it. Neither have I, but Echo seems to think it's important. The dragon made an urgent whistling sound and began manipulating the controls again, this time calling up historical databases. Ancient star charts appeared in the hologram, showing the same region of space from thousands of years ago. The system Echo had selected was marked with symbols that the computer couldn't translate. Those are pre-Empire markings, Captain Reyes said with growing excitement. Before the Corvani unified the galaxy under their rule. Some of those charts date back 5,000 years or more. Echo spread its wings and made a complex series of sounds that reminded Jake of a lecture. The dragon was trying to communicate something important, using vocalizations that ranged from subsonic rumbles to ultrasonic chimes that made Jake's ears ache. I wish we could understand what it's trying to tell us, Jake said. Maybe we can. Captain Reyes activated the ship's communication array and began scanning through translation protocols. The computer has xenolinguistic analysis programs designed for first contact situations. If Echo is actually trying to communicate in a structured language, the system might be able to identify patterns. The analysis took several minutes, during which Echo patiently repeated its vocalizations with the patience of a teacher working with slow students. Finally, the computer chimed with results. Linguistic patterns detected. Preliminary translation matrix established. Warning, translation confidence is extremely low due to limited data sample. What's it saying? Jake asked. The computer's synthesized voice was hesitant and mechanical. Approximate translation, home. Others. Family. Important to return. Danger from the translation program cannot identify the final concept. Possibly egg breakers or flame killers. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Others? There are other dragons? Echo bobbed its head enthusiastically and touched the star chart again, highlighting not just Draco's Rest but several other systems along the galactic rim. The dragon's excitement was obvious, its scales brightening and its wings fluttering with anticipation. If Echo was right, Captain Reyes said slowly, then the Corvani didn't complete their genocide after all. Some dragons survived, probably by retreating to the most remote regions of space. And Echo knows where they are. Echo might be more than just the last dragon. It might be the key to reuniting the survivors. She paused, considering the implications. Jake, do you understand what this means? If there's a population of dragons hidden somewhere in the outer rim, they could change the balance of power in the galaxy. The Corvani Empire might not be as invincible as everyone thinks. Jake scratched behind Echo's head again, marveling at how much the dragon had grown in just one day. How big do dragons get? According to the historical records, adult dragons could be anywhere from 20 to 50 meters long. Some of the legendary ones were supposedly even larger. Captain Reyes pulled up images from ancient databases, showing artistic representations of dragons in flight among the stars. They could travel through space without ships, breathe in vacuum, and manipulate energy in ways that modern science can't explain. And they were intelligent. More than intelligent. The few records that survived suggest they had technology that made Corvani science look primitive. They just didn't build ships or cities the way other species did. They were the technology. Echo made an impatient sound and began manipulating the navigation controls again, plotting a course toward Draco's Rest. The route led through uncharted space, far from any established trade routes or patrol areas. It wants to go home, Jake realized. The question is whether we should take it there. Captain Reyes highlighted the vast distances involved. Draco's Rest is 3 weeks away even at maximum hyperspace speed. We'd be completely on our own, with no possibility of support or rescue if something goes wrong. And if we don't? Then, Echo remains the last of its kind, and the Corvani will eventually find us. They have resources we can't match and patience measured in centuries. Hiding isn't a long-term solution. Jake studied the star chart, weighing their options. Echo watched him with those ancient eyes, and he had the unsettling feeling that the dragon understood every word they'd spoken. That it was waiting for the humans to catch up to conclusions it had reached hours ago. There's something else to consider, Captain Reyes said quietly. If we're right about Echo's abilities, it might be safer for everyone if it's reunited with its own kind. A baby dragon can disable 3 military vessels. What could a dozen adult dragons do to a Corvani fleet? You think they'd fight back? I think the Corvani have been the dominant power in the galaxy for so long that they've forgotten what real opposition looks like. They've built their empire by crushing anyone who stands against them, but they've never faced an enemy that could match their technology. Echo suddenly stiffened, its head turning toward the ship's sensor array. The dragon made a low warning sound that raised the hair on Jake's arms. What is it? Jake asked. Captain Reyes was already checking her instruments. We've got company. 4 ships just dropped out of hyperspace behind us. Corvani pursuit vessels, and they're gaining fast. How did they find us? They must have been tracking our hyperspace signature. The Corvani have some of the most advanced sensor technology in the galaxy. She activated the ship's defensive systems. Hold on, this is going to get rough. The Starfire shuddered as disruptor beams struck its shields. Warning alarms blared throughout the ship, and Jake could hear the crew responding to battle stations. Echo spread its wings and began to glow, its scales shifting through a spectrum of colors that reminded Jake of aurora displays. Can we outrun them? Jake asked. Not likely. They're flying interceptors, built for speed and firepower. We're tougher, but they're faster. Captain Reyes studied her tactical display. They're trying to disable our hyperdrive. Standard Corvani capture protocol. Echo made a decision for all of them. The dragon launched itself toward the ship's main viewport and began to sing, its voice rising in harmonies that made the air itself shimmer. Jake watched in amazement as the song seemed to reach out beyond the ship, crossing the empty space between them and their pursuers. The Corvani ships began to slow, their formation wavering as their pilots struggled with malfunctioning controls. But these weren't the patrol vessels they'd encountered at Nexus Station. These were military interceptors with hardened systems designed to resist electronic warfare. It's not working as well, Captain Reyes observed. They've adapted their technology. Echo's song changed, becoming deeper and more urgent. The dragon's entire body began to glow now, its scales blazing like molten metal. Jake could feel heat radiating from his companion, and the air around Echo began to ripple with energy distortions. Echo, what are you doing? Jake reached toward the dragon but stopped when the heat became too intense. The dragon opened its mouth and breathed fire, but not the small flame Jake had seen before. This was a torrent of energy that struck the viewport and somehow passed through it without damaging the transparent aluminum. The flame crossed the space between ships like a living thing, reaching out to touch the nearest Corvani interceptor. The enemy ship simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not disabled, but gone as if it had never been there at all. Jake stared at the empty space where it had been, trying to process what he'd witnessed. Molecular dissolution, Captain Reyes whispered. The dragon didn't just burn the ship. It unraveled it at the atomic level. The remaining Corvani vessels immediately began to retreat, their pursuit abandoned in favor of survival. Echo settled back onto the deck with a satisfied rumble, its scales dimming back to their normal burgundy color. Now I understand why the Corvani were so desperate to eliminate them, Jake said faintly. Dragons aren't just intelligent creatures. They're weapons of mass destruction. And Echo was still just a baby. Captain Reyes looked at the dragon with new respect and no small amount of fear. If it can do that now, what will it be capable of when it reaches full size? Echo made a soft questioning sound and touched the navigation controls again, highlighting the course to Draco's Rest. The message was clear, it was time to go home. Set course for Draco's Rest, Jake told Captain Reyes. Echo's right. If there are others like it out there, we need to find them before the Corvani do. This is going to change everything, Captain Reyes said as she programmed the new navigation coordinates. The balance of power, the political structure of the galaxy, everything we thought we knew about who's in charge. Jake watched Echo settle down for what appeared to be a nap, curling up on the deck like an oversized cat. The dragon looked peaceful and innocent, giving no hint of the terrifying power it had just demonstrated. Maybe that's not a bad thing, Jake said. The Corvani have been in charge for 3,000 years. Maybe it's time for someone else to have a turn. The Starfire entered hyperspace once again, carrying them toward the galactic rim and whatever waited for them in the ancient system called Draco's Rest. Behind them, the surviving Corvani ships transmitted urgent warnings to their superiors, reports of weapons technology that shouldn't exist and a threat that had been presumed extinct. In the depths of the Empire's capital worlds, ancient protocols were activated and fleets that hadn't been mobilized in centuries began preparing for war. The Corvani had crushed the dragon threat once before, and they would do so again, no matter the cost. But they had never faced a dragon that had been raised by humans, taught human values of loyalty and protection and stubborn refusal to surrender. Echo was not just the last of an ancient species, it was something new, something that combined the best qualities of two very different civilizations. And it was going home to wake up its family. The Draco's Rest system appeared on their sensors like something from a fairy tale. 3 worlds orbited the ancient red dwarf star, their surfaces gleaming with colors that shouldn't exist in nature. The innermost planet showed vast crystalline formations that caught and reflected the star's light in prismatic displays. The middle world was covered in what looked like forests of metallic trees that swayed despite having no atmosphere. The outermost planet appeared to be entirely composed of some kind of living coral that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. I'm not detecting any conventional technology, Captain Reyes reported from the bridge. No cities, no industrial facilities, no spacecraft. But the energy readings are off the charts. Jake stood beside her, holding Echo, who had grown noticeably larger during their 3-week journey. The dragon was now the size of a medium horse, with wings that could span 6 meters and scales that seemed to contain entire galaxies of swirling light. Echo stared at the alien worlds with obvious recognition and excitement. It's beautiful, Jake said softly. But where is everyone? Echo made a series of complex vocalizations that the ship's computer had learned to translate with increasing accuracy. The dragon's language was incredibly sophisticated, using harmonic layers and frequency modulations that could convey multiple concepts simultaneously. Translation: home song quiet. Family sleeps deep dream. Wake time comes with call sound. They're hibernating, Jake realized. The other dragons are in some kind of suspended animation. Captain Reyes frowned at her sensor readings. The energy signatures are coming from underground. Deep underground, in cavern systems that extend for hundreds of kilometers. If there are dragons down there, they've been sleeping for a very long time. Echo spread its wings and began to sing, its voice carrying harmonics that resonated through the ship's hull and seemed to reach out across the vast distances to the planets below. The song was hauntingly beautiful and, somehow familiar, as if Jake had heard echoes of it in dreams. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The crystalline formations on the first planet began to glow, pulsing in rhythm with Echo's song. The metallic forests on the second world started to move, their branches swaying in complex patterns that looked almost like communication. The coral structures on the third planet erupted in cascades of bioluminescent displays that painted the entire world in shifting patterns of light. "Something's happening," Captain Reyes said, her voice tight with amazement. "I'm reading massive energy fluctuations from all three worlds. Whatever's down there, it's waking up." Echo's song grew stronger, more complex, weaving melodies that seemed to call to something deep within the sleeping worlds. Jake could feel the dragon's excitement and anticipation, but also something else. Sorrow, perhaps, or longing. Echo had been alone for so long that the prospect of reunion with its own kind was almost overwhelming. The first dragon emerged from the crystal caverns of the inner planet like a living constellation. It was massive, easily 30 meters from nose to tail, with scales that captured and refracted light into rainbow cascades. Its wings stretched wide enough to cast shadows across continents, and, when it sang in response to Echo's call, the sound made the stars themselves seem to tremble. More dragons followed, rising from all three worlds in a display that took Jake's breath away. Dozens of them, each unique in size and coloration but all unmistakably magnificent. Some were sleek and serpentine, built for speed and grace. Others were broader and more powerful, their scales like living armor. A few were so large that Jake could see them clearly from orbit, ancient beings that moved with the stately pace of living mountains. "My God," Captain Reyes whispered. "How long have they been sleeping?" Echo's translation came through immediately, "Since the burning time. Since flamekillers came with death ships. Long sleep to escape extinction. 3,000 years." The dragons had retreated to this remote system when the Corvani genocide began, entering hibernation to survive until it was safe to wake. They had been waiting for a signal that the threat had passed, a call from one of their own that it was time to reclaim their place in the galaxy. The largest of the awakened dragons approached their ship, moving through space with impossible grace. It was ancient beyond measure, its scales the deep blue-black of the space between stars and its eyes like twin galaxies. When it spoke, its voice carried the weight of millennia. Echo translated, "Elder Mother says, small flame calls across the dark years. What brings young Son to the deep sleep place?" Jake looked at Echo, understanding that this moment would determine not just their fate, but the future of the entire galaxy. "Tell them about the Corvani. About what happened to you, what they're still doing." Echo began to sing again, its voice weaving a complex narrative that combined melody with meaning in ways that human language couldn't match. Jake could hear echoes of their escape from Nexus Station, the pursuit through hyperspace, and the growing threat of the Corvani fleets that were even now searching for them. The response from the assembled dragons was immediate and unmistakable. Their songs rose in harmony, creating a chorus that seemed to shake reality itself. The ancient beings who had slept for 3 millennia were waking not to peace, but to the discovery that their greatest enemies still ruled the galaxy. "Elder Mother speaks," Echo translated. "Flamekillers still hunt. Still spread death silence across the star songs. This cannot remain. They're going to fight back," Jake realized. "After 3,000 years, the dragons are going to war." Captain Reyes was studying her tactical displays with growing alarm. "We've got a problem. I'm detecting hyperspace signatures at the edge of the system. Multiple ships, moving fast. The Corvani had found them." Jake watched as a fleet of Imperial warships dropped out of hyperspace, their black hulls bristling with weapons designed for planetary bombardment. He counted at least 50 vessels, including several of the massive dreadnoughts that served as the backbone of the Corvani military. "How did they track us?" Captain Reyes asked. "It doesn't matter," Jake said grimly. "They're here, and they're not going to let us leave." The Corvani fleet commander's voice echoed across the communication channels, cold and implacable. "Attention unknown vessel and indigenous lifeforms. You are harboring a dangerous biological weapon in violation of Imperial security protocols. Surrender the creature immediately or face immediate termination." Echo made a sound that was definitely not friendly, its scales darkening to the color of fresh blood. The young dragon had grown up with human concepts of justice and protection, and the Corvani threat to its newfound family was not something it would tolerate. The elder dragon's response thundered across the system, a roar so powerful that it caused visible distortions in spacetime. The sound struck the Corvani fleet like a physical force, sending their ships tumbling out of formation and overloading their sensor arrays. But the Corvani had come prepared for dragon song. Their ships' hulls were lined with harmonic dampeners designed specifically to counter sonic attacks, and their crews wore protective gear that filtered out dangerous frequencies. The Imperial engineers had spent 3,000 years perfecting anti-dragon technology, and they were confident in their superiority. That confidence lasted exactly 37 seconds. The dragons didn't attack with song alone. They came at the Corvani fleet like living missiles, their massive forms accelerating through vacuum at speeds that should have been impossible. Their scales blazed with energy that turned them into streaks of light against the darkness, and, when they struck the Imperial ships, the results were catastrophic. Jake watched in amazement as a dragon the size of a skyscraper simply flew through a Corvani dreadnought, its passage unraveling the ship's molecular structure as if it were made of paper. Another dragon breathed a stream of energy that turned 3 destroyers into expanding clouds of plasma. The ancient beings moved with impossible grace and devastating efficiency, 3 millennia of suppressed rage finally finding expression. "They're not just fighting," Captain Reyes observed. "They're hunting." The Corvani fleet tried to respond with their own weapons, filling space with disruptor beams and antimatter missiles. But their targets moved too fast and hit too hard. Dragon scales turned aside energy weapons that could crack planets, and dragon fire consumed missiles before they could detonate. Echo watched the battle with obvious satisfaction, but Jake could see something else in the young dragon's posture. Sadness, perhaps, or regret that such violence was necessary. "This is just the beginning," Jake said, understanding finally dawning. "The Corvani won't stop with one fleet. They'll send everything they have." Echo's translation confirmed his fears. Elder Mother says, "Flamekillers will bring death ships beyond counting. Warsong must spread to all sleeping places. All family must wake." "There are more?" Captain Reyes asked. "More hidden refuges like this one?" Echo nodded and touched the navigation display, highlighting dozens of systems along the galactic rim. Remote, uncharted worlds where dragons had been sleeping for 3,000 years, waiting for the call to wake. "My God," Captain Reyes breathed. "If even half of those systems contain dragon populations." "The balance of power in the galaxy just shifted," Jake finished. "The Corvani Empire is about to face an enemy they thought they'd exterminated." The battle around them was winding down, the surviving Corvani ships retreating at maximum speed while transmitting desperate warnings to their superiors. The dragons had achieved complete victory with minimal casualties, their ancient skills proving more than adequate against modern Imperial technology. But Jake knew this was just the opening move in a conflict that would reshape the galaxy. The Corvani had built their empire on the assumption that they were the supreme military power, unopposed and unopposable. That assumption was about to be tested by creatures who remembered when the Empire was nothing more than a collection of primitive worlds afraid of the dark between stars. Echo spread its wings and sang again, its voice carrying a new message across interstellar distances. Not the call to wake that had roused the dragons of Draco's Rest, but something else. A call to arms, a summons to war, a promise that the long sleep was over and the time for reckoning had come. Across the galaxy, in hidden refuges and secret sanctuaries that the Corvani had never suspected, ancient beings began to stir. Dragons who had slept for millennia opened eyes like newborn stars and listened to the young voice calling them to war. The Corvani Empire was about to rediscover why they had needed 3 centuries and weapons of mass destruction to defeat the dragons the first time. And they were about to learn that this time, the dragons wouldn't be fighting alone. Because Echo had been raised by humans, and humans had taught it something that pure-blooded dragons had never possessed, the concept of justice, the value of mercy, and the unshakable belief that some things were worth fighting for no matter the odds. The galaxy was about to change, and it would never be the same again. Jake looked at Echo, who was now coordinating with the elder dragons through complex harmonies that his translator could barely follow. The young dragon that he'd bought for 3 credits had become something unprecedented, a bridge between species, a fusion of human determination and dragon power. "What happens now?" Jake asked. Echo turned to him with eyes that held the wisdom of ages and the fire of youth. When it spoke, its words carried the weight of prophecy and the promise of justice. Now, Echo said in perfect, unaccented English, we teach the galaxy that some species refuse to stay extinct. 6 months after the awakening at Draco's Rest, the galaxy had become unrecognizable. What the historical archives would later call the Dragon Resurgence had transformed from a single system's rebellion into a full-scale revolution that threatened the very foundations of the Corvani Empire. Jake stood on the observation deck of the Starfire, watching as hundreds of dragons moved through space around them like living constellations. The sight still took his breath away, even after months of witnessing their impossible grace and power. Some were massive beings larger than imperial dreadnoughts, their scales gleaming with the light of captive stars. Others were smaller and more agile, darting between their larger kin like living fighter craft. Echo had grown enormously during the conflict, now measuring nearly 20 meters from nose to tail. The young dragon's scales had deepened to a rich crimson that seemed to contain flowing rivers of molten gold, and its intelligence had expanded to encompass tactical thinking that impressed even the ancient elder dragons. Reconnaissance reports are coming in, Captain Reyes announced from the bridge. The Corvani are massing their entire reserve fleet at the Nexus Point. Every available ship from 3 sectors. Jake nodded grimly. The Nexus Point was a strategic hyperspace junction that controlled access to the Empire's core worlds. If the dragons could take it, they would have a clear path to the Corvani capital itself. If they failed, the concentrated Imperial fleet could launch counterattacks that would devastate the newly awakened dragon refuges. How many ships? Jake asked. Over 3,000. Including the Eternal Victory, their flag dreadnought. It's the largest warship ever built, with firepower equivalent to a small star. Echo, who had been coordinating the Dragon fleet's movements, turned to face them. The Dragon had learned to speak multiple human languages with perfect fluency, though it preferred the harmonic complexities of its own tongue when communicating with other dragons. The Elder Mothers have decided, Echo announced. We will not simply attack their fleet. We will teach them why the old ways failed. Jake frowned. What do you mean? 3,000 years ago, the Corvani succeeded in their genocide because we fought them as dragons always fought. Individually, with pride and territorial instincts that prevented true unity. This time will be different. Echo gestured with one wing toward the assembled dragon fleet, and Jake saw something that made his blood run cold. The dragons weren't just flying in formation, they were merging their energy fields, linking their consciousness across vast distances, becoming something that was simultaneously individual and collective. A battle mind, Echo explained. Something not attempted since the earliest days of our species. When dragons truly unite, we become more than the sum of our parts. Captain Reyes studied her sensors with growing amazement. The energy readings are incredible. It's like they're creating a single organism with a distributed nervous system. The transformation was visible even to the naked eye. The dragon's scales began to pulse in perfect synchronization, and the space between them filled with streams of energy that connected each creature to all the others. Their movements became fluid and coordinated, hundreds of individual minds working as one vast intelligence. And, at the center of it all was Echo, the bridge between species that had learned both dragon wisdom and human determination. The young dragon's unique perspective allowed it to translate concepts between the two races, facilitating a level of cooperation that neither could have achieved alone. The Corvani fleet is moving, Captain Reyes reported. They're advancing toward the dragon formation at maximum speed. Jake watched the tactical display as 3,000 Imperial warships approached the unified dragon fleet. The Corvani had learned from their previous encounters, adapting their tactics and technology to counter dragon abilities. Their ships now carried harmonic disruptors designed to break up dragon song, and their hulls were lined with quantum armor that could theoretically resist molecular dissolution. But they had never faced a battle mind before. The dragons didn't charge or roar or breathe fire. Instead, they sang. Not individual songs, but a harmony so complex and beautiful that it seemed to restructure reality itself. The music reached across space to touch the Corvani fleet, and, where it touched, impossible things began to happen. Imperial warships found their weapons turning against each other. Navigation systems began plotting courses toward the nearest star. Life support systems started playing lullabies instead of recycling air. The dragons weren't destroying the Corvani technology, they were convincing it to change sides. How is that possible? Captain Reyes whispered. Echo's answer came not in words, but in a direct mental transmission that somehow included both humans in the dragon battlemind. Jake suddenly found himself seeing the universe through dragon senses, perceiving the quantum fields that connected all matter and the harmonic frequencies that governed the behavior of everything from atoms to galaxies. To dragons, technology wasn't separate from nature. It was simply another form of organized energy, no different from the biological systems that powered their own bodies. And, like any energy pattern, it could be influenced, guided, and ultimately transformed through the proper application of harmonic resonance. The Corvani had built their empire on the assumption that their technology made them superior to any biological threat. They had forgotten that dragons didn't see technology and biology as separate categories. To them, a starship was just another form of life, with its own energy patterns and harmonic frequencies. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted less than an hour. One by one, the Imperial ships ceased their attack runs and began broadcasting surrender signals. Their crews, unharmed but thoroughly demoralized, found themselves unable to use their own weapons against the dragons. The Eternal Victory, the massive flagship that represented the pinnacle of Corvani military engineering, was the last to surrender. Its commander, Admiral Kefar, had spent his entire career believing in Imperial supremacy. Now he found himself transmitting an unconditional surrender to creatures his people had thought extinct. Echo translated the Admiral's transmission for Jake and Captain Reyes. He says they yield, but he wants to know why we don't simply destroy them. He cannot understand why we show mercy to those who showed us none. Jake understood. The Corvani expected dragon vengeance to mirror their own genocidal brutality. They couldn't comprehend that the resurgent dragons might choose a different path. Because we learned something during our long sleep, Echo explained, directing its words toward the captured fleet. We learned that extinction begets extinction, that hatred breeds only more hatred. The galaxy needs balance, not another empire built on bones. The dragon battlemind began to disperse as individual dragons reclaimed their separate identities. But the connection remained, a network of consciousness that could be activated whenever true unity was needed. The dragons had evolved beyond their ancient limitations, becoming something new while honoring what they had always been. Over the following weeks, the transformation of galactic politics accelerated beyond anyone's expectations. The Corvani Empire, faced with the reality that their military supremacy had been permanently shattered, began negotiating for a peaceful transition of power. Many of their subject species, encouraged by the dragon example, declared independence and began forming their own governments. But the dragons didn't seek to replace the Corvani Empire with one of their own. Instead, they facilitated the creation of something unprecedented, a galactic federation based on cooperation rather than conquest, with representation for every sapient species and protection for all forms of life. Jake found himself appointed as the first human ambassador to the Dragon Congress, a role that would have been unimaginable 6 months earlier. His experience raising Echo had given him unique insights into dragon psychology, and his background as a mechanic provided practical knowledge of how different technologies could be integrated and improved. You realize what you've done, don't you? Captain Reyes asked as they stood together on the observation deck, watching dragons and human ships working side by side to build new trade routes and communication networks. I bought a dragon egg for 3 credits? You changed the course of galactic history. One stubborn human who refused to let a good thing die. Jake smiled, watching Echo demonstrate atmospheric flight techniques to a group of young dragons who had never learned to soar through planetary skies. The sight filled him with pride and wonder, but also with a deep sense of responsibility. Echo changed history, Jake corrected. I just happened to be there when it needed help. As if hearing its name, Echo glided over to join them, its massive form moving with impossible grace despite its size. The dragon had become one of the most influential beings in the galaxy, serving as a bridge between the ancient Dragon Council and the emerging Federation government. The Elder Mothers want to know if you will accept permanent residence in the Draco systems, Echo announced. They believe your presence would be valuable for continuing human-dragon cooperation. Jake considered the offer. Earth was 3 months away by the fastest ships, and his old life as a station mechanic seemed like something from another existence. But the work here was just beginning. The galaxy needed people who understood both technology and biology, who could help different species find common ground. "Will you teach me to fly?" Jake asked. Echo's expression was unmistakably amused. Humans are not designed for atmospheric flight. However, there are other forms of soaring that we could explore. Such as? Wait and see. 6 months later, Jake Morrison stood in the main assembly chamber of the new Galactic Federation as representatives from 300 worlds voted to ratify the Dragon Accords, a comprehensive treaty that established the framework for interspecies cooperation and mutual protection. The vote was unanimous, but Jake barely noticed the celebration. His attention was focused on the observation windows where Echo and a dozen other dragons were performing an aerial ballet around the space station, their scales blazing with patterns of light that told the story of their resurrection and the galaxy's transformation. The dance was both celebration and promise, a declaration that the age of extinction had ended and the era of cooperation had begun. Later that evening, as Jake made his way to his new quarters aboard Dragon Station 1, he paused at a memorial wall that had been erected in honor of all the species that hadn't survived the Corvani genocide. Hundreds of names were carved into the crystalline surface, representing civilizations that had been lost to imperial expansion. At the bottom of the memorial was a simple inscription in a dozen languages: "They shall not be forgotten. Their legacy lives in our determination to build a better galaxy." Jake traced the words with his finger, thinking about how much had changed since that day when he'd spotted something interesting in a junk dealer's clearance bin. 3 credits had bought him a worthless stone that turned out to be priceless. But, more than that, it had bought him the chance to help prevent the kind of tragedy that had created this memorial. Echo settled beside him with the grace of falling leaves, its presence warm and comforting. "You think of the lost ones," the dragon observed. "I think about how close we came to losing you too. If that captain hadn't needed repairs, if I hadn't been curious about a strange rock, if things had gone just a little differently. But they did not. Perhaps there are no coincidences, only patterns too large for us to perceive." Echo's scales shimmered with contemplative light. The Elder Mothers speak of the great song, the harmony that connects all things across space and time. They believe that every note, no matter how small, has its place in the greater music. Jake smiled, understanding. He had been a single note in a vast cosmic symphony, a minor key that had somehow shifted the entire composition. But, then, every song was made up of individual notes, each one essential to the whole. "So what happens now?" Jake asked. Echo spread its wings, catching the light from the station's artificial sun. "Now we teach the galaxy to sing." And, in the years that followed, that's exactly what they did. The dragon song spread from world to world, not as conquest but as invitation. Species that had been enemies learned to harmonize. Worlds that had known only war discovered the rhythms of peace. The galaxy, for the first time in millennia, began to sing as one. Jake Morrison, the mechanic who had bought a dragon for 3 credits, lived to see the transformation complete. And, when he was very old and ready to rest, Echo was there beside him, grown now into one of the great dragons of legend but still the curious, determined creature who had